My name is Eloise Carver. I never imagined the place I built from scratch, the garden I trimmed with my bare hands, the walls I painted each spring, the home I once called my sanctuary, would one day be signed away under pressure beneath the smooth smile of someone I once called family. If you're here because you like dramatic stories, ones that twist your heart and make you question everything you know about love, loyalty, and power, well, you might actually regret missing this one. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now let me take you back. My story doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins in a kitchen warm with chamomile and lemon, with my daughter-in-law humming as she pours me tea. Just sign here, Mom. It's for the taxes. We're all just trying to make things easier. Her voice was gentle, her smile reassuring. But behind her eyes, I'd later realize, was calculation. At 73, I was still sharp. I kept my mind busy solving crosswords faster than the paper could print them. I remembered court procedures from my old job. I'd filed thousands of documents. I could spot a forged signature across a crowded courtroom. But that day I was tired. And tiredness dulls even the sharpest blade. It had been a long week. I'd just gotten out of the hospital, a minor scare with my blood pressure, and my son Aaron insisted I move in with him and Lydia, my daughter-in-law. Just for a few weeks, he said, until you're steady on your feet. I didn't want to be a burden, but I agreed. They were kind at first. Lydia even arranged my medications in labeled trays and fixed the guest room just the way I liked. There were scented candles, clean sheets, even the crossword section printed out and folded beside my tea each morning. I wanted to believe it was love. I clung to it. But soon the tone shifted. Lydia began referencing how much work it is to take care of me. She'd sigh loudly while helping me down the stairs. She started talking about consolidating assets and estate planning in ways that made me feel like I was already gone. Then came the folder. It was blue, my favorite color, I noticed, and sat neatly in the center of the breakfast table one morning. Lydia brought it out like it was just another recipe she wanted to show me. "This will help us manage things better," she said, brushing a crumb from the table. "It's just temporary. A legal formality. You still own everything, of course." I opened it slowly. The pages were dense, filled with legalese I once could have dissected blindfolded. But that morning my vision swam. The light glared through the window, making the black ink bleed into itself. My blood pressure monitor beeped in the background. My son walked in right then and kissed my forehead. "Just sign it, Mom. Lydia's taking care of everything. Trust us." I remember the weight of the pen. It felt like granite. I remember my fingers trembling, hovering over the line with my name pre-typed beneath it. My signature spilled out like an accident. That's how they got it. The deed. To my house. The house I bought when Aaron was 7 years old. The same one he learned to ride his bike in front of. The one where his father died quietly in our room upstairs. The one place I never imagined would become someone else's chess piece. But it wasn't just the house. It was what came after. I wasn't guessed into conversations anymore. My doctor's appointments were rescheduled without telling me. Lydia started referring to me in the third person, even when I was in the room. "She needs to rest. Don't overwhelm her. She's a bit forgetful lately." They were recasting me as someone I wasn't. Then one night I overheard Lydia on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, we can list it next month. She'll never even know. It's practically ours already." I didn't confront her. Not that night. Because the moment I heard those words, "practically ours already," something in me clicked. Not panic, not fear, but something deeper. I was a court clerk for over 30 years. I may have been retired, but I wasn't erased. I still knew people. One of them was June Delacroix, now an attorney with her own real estate litigation firm. We used to have lunch every Thursday in the courthouse cafeteria. I still had her number, still remembered her voice. I waited until Lydia left the house the next morning. I called June. "Eloise Carver," she said after 2 rings. "I was just thinking about you the other day." I told her everything. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just explained. She was quiet for a while. Then she said the one thing I hadn't allowed myself to believe. "If they coerced your signature when you weren't of sound capacity or misrepresented what you were signing, it might not hold up." I didn't say anything for a moment. Just listen to the clock tick above the sink. Then she added, "Do you want to fight this?" My hand tightened around the phone. "Yes," I said, but quietly. June invited me to her office that afternoon. I insisted on taking the bus. Lydia thought I was going to my knitting group, which I had quit months ago. I needed her to keep underestimating me. The law office hadn't changed much. Same navy carpet. Same brass doorknobs polished to a shine. June looked older. Of course, we both did. But she hadn't lost her sharpness. Her eyes scanned me like I was a case file already halfway solved. "You brought the documents?" she asked. I nodded and slid the blue folder across the desk. She flipped through it, her manicured fingers dancing over the legalese with ease. I saw the flicker in her expression, first disbelief, then anger, then something else. "Strategy. They made you sign this just after a hospitalization?" she asked. I nodded again. I wasn't thinking straight. I trusted them. Her mouth tightened. "This isn't just morally wrong. It might be legally invalid. We spent an hour going over everything: my medical records, witness opportunities, the timeline, and the language used in the documents." June highlighted phrases that reeked of manipulation. "They filed it without your consultation. That's a red flag. And the notary? Look." She pointed to the signature. "That's Lydia's cousin." Conflict of interest. Each detail made my stomach twist. But it also gave me hope. Concrete procedural hope. We crafted a plan. She would file a petition to reverse the transfer on grounds of coercion and mental duress, supported by a physician's note verifying I was recovering from high blood pressure and mild disorientation at the time of signing. She would argue that Lydia acted with undue influence and that Aaron failed in his fiduciary responsibility as my son and informal caretaker. I listened silent and still. A life spent watching hearings had trained me well, and now it was my life on the docket. June paused and leaned forward. "Eloise, once we file, they'll know. This will blow things open." I took a slow breath. I want it back, but I don't want to scream. I want them to feel the silence coming. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part. I let Lydia believe I was slipping further. I forgot what day it was. I asked the same questions twice. I let her speak over me at dinners, interrupt my thoughts, laugh when I repeated myself. "You really are getting a little foggy, huh?" she said once, nudging my arm with a too sweet grin. I smiled back. Because while she laughed at my supposed forgetfulness, June and her team were gathering affidavits, hospital records, and notary logs. They even subpoenaed a voicemail Aaron left the day after I signed the deed, telling a friend, "It's all in her name now. We're finally done with that house." That voicemail was gold. June filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning. The court issued a formal notice to Lydia and Aaron. They were required to appear for a hearing within 30 days. See, no fanfare, no drama. Just a quiet envelope arriving in their mailbox like a storm cloud in disguise. 3 days after the papers were served, the temperature in the house changed. Lydia stopped bringing me tea. Aaron walked in and out of rooms without looking at me. They were silent, but their movements were louder than words. One evening, I walked past the kitchen and heard Lydia's voice low and panicked. "She's got a lawyer. How did she even—" "You said she didn't remember anything." Aaron's voice came next, more muted, ashamed. "She's smarter than she looks." Damn right I was. The tension mounted. They began hiding their conversations, avoiding eye contact. Lydia stopped inviting friends over. The energy in the house grew restless, like a snake coiling just beneath the floorboards. Then came the confrontation. It happened on a rainy Thursday. I was sitting by the window watching the downpour over the garden I once tended. Lydia marched in, holding the legal notice like it was contaminated. "What is this?" I looked at the paper calmly. "A correction," I said. Her lips thinned. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." She started pacing. "You signed it willingly. You gave it to us." "I signed it under pressure, after being manipulated. In your words, it was just a formality." She blinked, caught. "You were supposed to be grateful," she whispered, "for being robbed." Her face flushed red. "We took care of you." "No," I said softly. "You managed me." "There's a difference." Aaron came home later, eyes low, shoulders tight. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He simply placed a takeout bag on the table and disappeared into his room. It was strange seeing my son shrink into himself, no longer the boy who held my hand in grocery stores, but a man folding under guilt he didn't know what to do with. I didn't relish their discomfort, but I also didn't apologize for it. This wasn't revenge. This was recovery, and I was just getting started. The court date was set for 3 weeks from that Thursday. 3 weeks of pretending. 3 weeks of invisible tension coiling through the walls of my own home. 3 weeks of Lydia avoiding my eyes and Aaron walking like a ghost. But beneath the silence, I could feel something shifting. I began documenting everything. Dates, behaviors, words. Not because I needed proof anymore. June had already collected enough to fill a binder, but because writing gave me back my voice. In a world where I'd been muted by smiles and forms and the gentle push of manipulation, the act of recording felt like reclaiming. It started small. I wrote down the day Lydia replaced the framed photo of my late husband and me with a painting she bought online. Then the day Aaron told someone on the phone, "She doesn't even care about that place anymore. She just wants a roof." They didn't know I was listening, but I always was. One afternoon I asked to visit my old house. They looked at me like I'd asked to visit the moon. "It's not really a good time," Lydia said, glancing at Aaron. "We've got work being done. Renovations." "Just 10 minutes," I said. "For memory's sake." She hesitated. Then she smiled. "Of course." She drove me. I'll never forget what I saw when we pulled up. The porch swing where I used to drink tea with my husband every Sunday was gone. The shutters were painted gray. There was a "coming soon" real estate sign half buried in the grass. The name on the sign wasn't theirs. It belonged to a brokerage Lydia had once interned for. She was flipping it. I wasn't even supposed to live long enough to notice. She left me in the car while she talked to someone inside. I watched through the windshield as a young man with a clipboard nodded and pointed toward the garage. He didn't even glance at me. It was as if I was a ghost in the passenger seat of a home I'd built with my own hands. When Lydia returned, I asked her, "When was the swing taken down?" She blinked. "Oh, it was old. We didn't think it was safe anymore." I said nothing. But inside, something final clicked into place. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain returned soft against the windows. I lay in bed thinking about how many winters I'd watched storms from that porch. How many stories I'd read aloud in that living room. The laughter, the meals, the years. Gone like a book stolen mid-chapter. But I still had the ending. June called the next morning with news. "They filed a preliminary objection. They're saying you were fully competent, that you signed willingly, and that the deed transfer was your idea." I almost laughed. "They'll lose," she added, "but they're going to fight it." "Good," I said. "Let them." We drafted an affidavit together, my statement. It detailed everything. The hospitalization, the medication that left me foggy, the timing, the pressure, Lydia's insistence, Aaron's silence, the forged notary witness. "I'll include the voice memo," June said, referring to the voicemail from Aaron bragging about the house. "And the listing you saw, she's trying to sell it. That's gold." I signed the statement, this time with full awareness, full clarity, full intent. 3 days later, I woke up to find the house empty. Lydia and Aaron were gone. Not just for errands, but gone. Their closet was half packed. Kitchen drawers left open. A note on the kitchen table read, "We're staying with friends for a while. This is all too much. We'll talk after the hearing." No names, no apology. I stood in the center of the kitchen and laughed. Just once, soft and dry. It wasn't joy. It was recognition. They didn't see me as a mother, or a woman, or even a threat. They saw me as a problem, but I'd become a problem with a lawyer. And that changed everything. The following week passed in a strange quiet. I cooked my own meals, sat in my own silence, read, waited. Each day I stared at a small photo I kept beside my bed, my husband and me on the day we bought the house. We looked like strangers now, younger, lighter, oblivious to how things would unfold. "I'll fix this," I whispered to the picture, "even if it's just for me." And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. Because my house, my life wasn't theirs to sell. It was mine to reclaim. The courtroom was quiet that morning. I arrived early dressed in a navy skirt suit I hadn't worn since retirement. It still fit though. The shoulders sat a little softer. My silver hair was pinned neatly and I carried only one thing. A leather folder holding every copy of every document I had kept for the past 30 years. I'd always been the type to keep everything. Receipts, letters, even expired insurance policies. Back then I thought it was just habit. But now I realized it was instinct. Some part of me always knew that silence wouldn't be enough. That one day I'd need proof. June met me at the courthouse steps. She was in heels and wore that determined look I remembered from her clerk days, a kind of quiet ferocity that didn't need volume to be powerful. "They'll try to delay it," she said, tucking a binder under her arm. "They'll try to make you look confused or emotional. Just speak plainly. You know more about courtrooms than they do." I nodded. We walked in together. Aaron and Lydia were already seated. Lydia wore a pearl gray dress and too much perfume. Aaron looked older than I remembered, tired, almost sunken in his suit. He didn't meet my eyes. Neither of them did. The judge was a woman mid-50s, hair pulled into a tight bun, sharp eyes. No nonsense. I liked her immediately. "Case 2372B," the clerk announced. "Carver versus Carver and Mead. Petition to reverse deed transfer due to coercion and undue influence." I sat quietly as June began her statement. "Your Honor," she said, standing tall, "this case isn't just about a piece of property. It's about deception. It's about trust violated by those closest to Minnie's. Eloise Carver, at a time when she was physically vulnerable, recovering from a medical condition, and placed under psychological pressure by her son and daughter-in-law." Lydia rolled her eyes. Aaron folded his hands tightly in his lap. June continued. "They pressured her into signing over the deed to her home under the guise of simplifying finances. But what they were really doing was manipulating her into surrendering her legacy." She handed the judge a thick packet. "These documents show the timeline. Medical records confirm Ms. Carver's disoriented state during that period. The notary was a cousin of the daughter-in-law. The house was listed for sale shortly after the transfer without Missy Carver's knowledge." The judge leafed through the packet slowly. Then it was the other side's turn. Their attorney was a polished man in a pinstripe suit, hair perfectly combed. He stood with the kind of confidence I had seen break apart under cross-examination many times in my career. "Your Honor," he said, smiling as if we were all old friends, "this is a family matter that has been needlessly escalated. Miss Carver willingly signed over the property. She was of sound mind. She even lived with the defendants afterward without objection." He turned slightly toward me. "Families sometimes make informal arrangements. And it's unfortunate that Ms. Carver now believes she was taken advantage of. But buyer's remorse is not legal grounds for reversal." I felt June bristle beside me. Then came the part I expected. They called me to the stand. The bailiff swore me in. I sat straight, hands in my lap, my voice even. "Mrs. Carver," their attorney began, "would you say you're forgetful?" "No," I said. "Have you ever misplaced your medication? Forgotten appointments?" "I've missed a few, but that doesn't make me incompetent." He smiled slightly. "Of course. And do you remember the day you signed the deed?" "I do." "Did your son threaten you?" "No, he didn't need to." He blinked. "I'm sorry." I leaned forward slightly. "They didn't raise their voices. They didn't lock me in a room. They did something worse. They made me feel like I was in the way, like I was becoming a burden. And then they smiled and said they would take care of everything if I just signed." The courtroom was silent. I could feel Lydia's stare burn through me, but I didn't flinch. "They timed it when I was sick, on medication, foggy. I trusted them. That was my mistake." I looked directly at the judge. "But I didn't sign my legacy away knowingly. And I didn't give up the house I built because I wanted to. I did it because I was manipulated by people who knew how to smile while they did it." When I stepped down, my hands were steady. June stood again. "We ask that the deed be returned to Missy Carver's name and that a restraining order be considered to prevent any further sale attempts until this matter is fully resolved." The judge said nothing for a long time. Then she looked up and said, "I'll review everything. Ruling to be issued in 7 days." The gavel struck, and just like that we stood. No applause. No fury, just the kind of quiet that falls after a storm, but before the sun comes back. Lydia stormed out without a word. Aaron followed behind silent, and I walked out of the courtroom into the morning light. Because for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The week that followed was the longest of my life. 7 days can feel like an eternity when your past, your name, your dignity are all waiting for someone else's signature. June called me every other day, giving me updates, though there was little to say until the ruling was issued. Judges like to be thorough, she reminded me, and this one knows how much is at stake. I spent those days in a kind of emotional limbo, not grieving, not celebrating, just suspended. The house was quiet. Lydia and Aaron never returned. They left some of their clothes in the drawers, half a bottle of perfume in the bathroom, an open bag of rice on the counter. As if they had planned to come back but couldn't bear to face me again. Or maybe they simply assumed I wouldn't be here much longer. I dusted the windows, watered the plants, and then one afternoon I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I walked into the garage. It was still there, my husband's old toolbox. A dusty box of Christmas decorations, a stack of records we used to play on Sunday mornings while making pancakes, and behind them all, a photo album, the real kind, leather-bound, heavy. I brought it inside and sat cross-legged on the floor like I was 30 years younger. The photos told the truth. No courtroom transcript ever could. There was Aaron, at 5 years old, painting the porch railing with his father. Me in the background holding a tray of lemonade. A shot of us on the front steps covered in dust, laughing about the window Aaron had shattered with a soccer ball. The house wasn't just a place. It was history, memory. It was the living diary of my family, and they had tried to sell it like a used car. On the 6th day, I got a call. Not from June, from Aaron. I stared at the phone as it rang. My fingers hovered over the green button, unsure whether to answer. Then I picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was thin, like it had been run through a shredder. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." "Neither was I replied. He sighed. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I said nothing. He continued. "I didn't know she was going to list the house. I thought we were just consolidating things. I didn't think." "You didn't want to think," I said softly. He paused. "She said it was safer this way. That if you got sick again, we'd already have everything set up." "She lied, Aaron. She used your love for convenience. And you let her." He didn't defend himself. "I miss Dad," he said finally. "So do I replied. "Every single day." There was a long silence. Then he asked, "If the judge rules in your favor, what happens to us?" I took a deep breath. "That's not up to the judge." The final ruling came the next morning. June called before 8 a.m. "Do you want me to read it?" she asked. "Yes," I said, staring out at the sun rising over the backyard. "The judge ruled in our favor," she said, voice steady. "The deed transfer is nullified. Full ownership reverts to you immediately." She included a statement about the pattern of manipulation and undue influence. "It's strong. It's solid." I closed my eyes. The silence around me thickened, not with fear this time, but with relief. "Thank you," I whispered. June paused. "You did this, Eloise?" Quietly, cleanly, exactly how you wanted. I didn't cry. Not then. I hung up the phone and walked outside into the garden. The air smelled like early spring wet soil jasmine possibility. I kneeled beside the roses and started pulling weeds. My knees ached, my back protested, but I didn't stop. Because this wasn't just gardening. It was reclamation. It was planting roots back where they belonged. My hands were in the dirt when Lydia pulled up. I didn't look up. She stood there for a long time before saying anything. "You got it back." I nodded. She took a step forward. "You ruined everything. Do you know that?" I looked up then. My gloves were muddy, my blouse smeared with earth. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." She stared at me, waiting maybe for me to say more, to yell, to throw her out. But I wasn't interested in her scene. I turned back to the soil and began trimming a rose stem. When I looked up again, she was gone. I didn't watch her leave, because she no longer lived in the story I was writing for myself. And this time, I was the only one holding the pen. The next few days passed in an unfamiliar calm. No slammed doors, No passive-aggressive sighs from the kitchen. No second-guessing my own memory, my intentions, or my worth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself again. Not a burden, not a problem to manage. Just Eloise. I brewed tea in my favorite ceramic pot, the one Lydia had tucked away in a box labeled Donate. I played old records in the living room. I opened the curtains in every room and let the morning light fill the house I fought to reclaim. Victory wasn't loud. It didn't come with balloons or champagne. It was the quiet satisfaction of sleeping in your own bed, in your own home, with no fear of being removed. But the truth is, the battle wasn't only about the deed. It was about something deeper, something that doesn't show up in court filings. It was about being seen. A week after the ruling, I received a letter. It was handwritten. From Erin. Dear Mom, I know I've said sorry before, but words feel small now. You have every reason to cut me out completely. I stood by and let it happen. I told myself I was being practical, that it was all for your good. But really, I was just scared. Scared to push back. Scared of being the bad guy in my marriage. I forgot what you taught me when I was little. That being kind doesn't mean being quiet. I was quiet, Mom, when you needed me to speak up the most. I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm hoping someday we can build something back, even if it's small. Love, Aaron. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. But I also didn't throw it away. Instead, I made an appointment. Not with June, with a financial planner. I had never needed one before. I managed my own affairs for decades. But after what happened, I knew I couldn't rely on intuition or trust alone. I wanted everything clear, ironclad, and impossible to be twisted again. We went through my will, my power of attorney, my healthcare directives. Every clause was rewritten with precision. No vague language. No room for misinterpretation. No family member can act as executor, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. Noted, she said. It wasn't bitterness. It was wisdom forged from pain. Afterward, I walked past a community center on Main Street. There was a sign in the window. Legal aid for seniors volunteers needed. I stepped inside. A young man with kind eyes greeted me. Are you here for services? No, I said. I'm here to offer mine. They sat me down, took my information, and scheduled me to begin helping seniors understand their housing rights, powers of attorney, and estate protection. Why do you want to help with this? The woman asked. I looked at her. Because people get tricked quietly, and they lose everything before they realize it. She nodded like she understood. That evening, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, staring at the deed that now bore my name again. Not because someone gifted it to me, not because I inherited it, but because I fought for it, with calm, with logic, with silence sharper than any scream. And just when I thought the day had closed itself neatly, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a teenage boy no older than 16. Mrs. Carver, he asked. Yes. He held out a brown envelope. I'm supposed to give this to you from Mrs. A. Mead. She said it was important. I opened the envelope after he left. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a receipt, a full cancellation of the real estate listing. No note, no apology, just the act itself. For once, Lydia had let her silence speak for her. And for the first time, I was okay with that, because I had already said what I needed to say. In court, and in stone. I didn't tell anyone about the envelope Lydia sent. I didn't feel the need to broadcast that small surrender, that quiet retraction of her intentions. Some things aren't meant to be paraded. They're meant to be witnessed and then filed away, like old case files or closed chapters. And in truth, I wasn't angry anymore. What surprised me most in the weeks after the court ruling wasn't the absence of Lydia's manipulation or Aaron's silence. It was the return of my own peace, the unburdened kind. The kind I hadn't known I'd lost until it came rushing back like warm sunlight through old curtains. I was not a woman broken. I was a woman restored. It took me nearly 3 weeks before I returned to the house. My house. The one Lydia had tried to sell. The key was still on my ring, even though she had the locks changed months ago. I had since replaced them again after the ruling. I wanted no reminders of her touch on that doorknob. I opened the front door and stepped into quiet. Not emptiness quiet. The air was still. The house had that slight, musty scent of a place waiting for someone to return. A few scuff marks on the floor. One curtain rod missing. A box labeled donate still half filled with some of my old china. I set my purse down and walked from room to room. The kitchen, stripped of its warmth but intact. The hallway, where Aaron once skated in socks and broke a vase. The living room, where my husband and I celebrated birthdays with too much cake and too much joy. And finally, the upstairs bedroom. My bedroom. I opened the windows, let the breeze in, sat on the edge of the bed and breathed in the quiet. The silence didn't ache anymore. It felt like mine again. The next day, I brought cleaning supplies. Not just to tidy, but to reclaim. There's something ceremonial about cleaning what others tried to erase. Every sponge stroke, every polished corner was a small declaration. I'm still here. I kept the old photographs on the mantel, replaced the fake orchids Lydia had put up with fresh wildflowers from the garden. I even found the porch swing discarded in the shed. The ropes frayed. I brought it out, sanded the wood, repainted the slats. It creaked with familiarity as I sat in it again. The same swing where my husband once handed me morning coffee with a wink and a kiss. I closed my eyes. I could almost feel his presence again. On the fifth morning, I brought a chair out to the front lawn and sat there with a cup of tea and the newspaper. Neighbors passed by, slowed down, waved. Some looked surprised to see me back. One woman stopped Marjorie from 3 houses down. We used to bake together during the holidays. I thought you'd moved out, she said, adjusting her glasses. No, I replied. I was on a detour, but I'm home now. She smiled, paused, and said, I'm glad. This street wasn't the same without you. That night, I began writing again. Not documents, not affidavits, but memories. I opened a fresh journal and titled the first page, The Quiet Wins. I wrote about the way Lydia's tone changed when she wanted something. I wrote about Aaron's downcast eyes. I wrote about the victory not for vengeance, but for peace. Because no one teaches you what it feels like to win without gloating, to walk away without needing an audience, to rebuild without needing others to watch. But I wanted to remember, for myself, so that the next time someone tried to turn my silence into permission, I'd remember what silence can also become. A boundary. Later that week, I received a call from the Community Legal Center. Eloise, said the program director, we have a woman 79 years old who thinks her nephew forged her signature on a bank document. She's scared. Doesn't know where to start. I said book her in. I'll meet her Thursday morning. And I did. She sat across from me, nervous voice shaking. I said, take a breath. Let's start with the documents. She looked up at me surprised. You know how to read this? I used to do it for strangers, I said. Now I do it for women like us. Her eyes filled with tears. She wasn't just scared. She was relieved someone finally understood. The woman's name was Myra. She had hands like mine, thin, worn, beautiful in the way only age can make them. She clutched a manila envelope like it contained both her last hope and her worst fear. I don't want to cause a fuss, she said, as if she were apologizing for breathing. You're not causing a fuss, I said gently. You're reclaiming your voice. She relaxed slightly, and together we began to examine the bank statement she believed had been forged. It didn't take long. The signature was clearly traced. Too smooth, too perfect. And the date it was signed. The day she'd been admitted to the hospital for hip surgery. They thought you'd never check, I said. She nodded, eyes wide. It's my nephew. I raised him after his mom left. He's been living with me helping out. And now I think he's trying to take everything. Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers. You're not alone. And you're not crazy. We're going to fix this. Helping Myra was more than legal work. It was a mirror. Everything she said, the hesitance, the guilt, the deep fear of being seen as difficult echoed pieces of my own journey. I'd lived it, and now I could guide someone else through it. That day, I realized something powerful. My story wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a blueprint. Word about my volunteer work started to spread. By the end of the month, I had 3 more appointments. 2 women, 1 man. All seniors. all quietly manipulated by family members who treated their kindness like currency. Each time I greeted them with tea and a folder. Each time they arrived with shame tucked under their arms like it was part of the dress code. And each time I helped them put it down. It wasn't flashy work. It wasn't televised or tweeted. It didn't come with dramatic speeches or courtroom outbursts. It was slow, precise, restorative, and it was mine. Then one afternoon, Aaron called again. I came by the house, he said. Didn't knock. Just stood outside. I waited. I saw the swing. You repainted it. I did. I remembered when Dad pushed me on that swing, he said. And I remembered you watching, always there. He paused, then added, I didn't realize what it cost you to always be there. There was silence between us for a moment, the kind that was finally honest. Do you want to come inside? I asked. Have tea? I do, he said. But only if it's okay. It's okay. He arrived the next day, alone. No Lydia, no smug smiles. Just a man, my son, carrying 2 paper bags of groceries and something heavier in his posture. Remorse. We sat in the kitchen. He unpacked the bags like he used to when he was a teenager, when helping meant peeling potatoes and humming songs under his breath. He made tea while I sliced bread. And then we sat. Just sat. Not mother and son in conflict, but 2 people trying to find a way back. He didn't ask about the deed. I didn't offer. Instead, we talked about the garden, the swing, the records in the living room, his job, my volunteer work. We laughed once when he remembered how he broke the window playing baseball. It was a line drive, he said proudly. It was reckless, I corrected. Best hit of my life. And just like that, something softened between us. Before he left, he turned at the doorway. Do you hate me? I looked at him. No, I said. I hate what you let happen. But I don't hate you. He swallowed hard. I want to earn your trust back. Then start by remembering who you came from. He nodded and walked away slowly like a man beginning a long journey he knew was overdue. That night, I sat on the porch swinging a quilt over my lap. The stars were out clear and sharp. I sipped my tea and watched the moon cast long shadows on the lawn. And for the first time since everything began, I felt something even deeper than peace. I felt rooted, not just in the house or in the land, but in myself, in the knowing that silence doesn't mean surrender, that quiet doesn't mean weakie, that dignity can be fierce, and that the strongest revenge is simply surviving intact, with your head held high and your name still yours. The following week brought something unexpected. A letter, not from the court, not from a lawyer or a bank, but from Lydia. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, addressed in her unmistakably sharp handwriting. No return address. For a moment, I considered tossing it into the fireplace unopened. But something stopped me. Not curiosity. Closure. I sat at the dining table, the same one she once polished weekly with citrus oil, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. Eloise, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you tore this up right now. I did what I did out of fear, not malice. I saw the future closing in and I panicked. I didn't grow up with much. Owning a house, having control, it meant safety to me. And when you came to live with us, I let that fear shape my choices. I convinced myself it was about simplifying things. But really, it was about making sure I had something to hold on to. I realize now, I tried to hold on to what wasn't mine. I'm sorry, Lydia. That was it. No request for forgiveness. No manipulative plea for reconciliation. Just a confession. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same drawer where I had kept Aaron's apology. Not to save it, but to remind myself that people don't always stay villains. Sometimes they grow up late. The house, meanwhile, had slowly begun to feel like home again. I took down the modern art prints Lydia had hung and replaced them with my old watercolors. I found my late husband's reading glasses in a box and placed them back on the hallway shelf right beside our wedding photo. I restored what I could and let go of what I couldn't. Some marks can't be scrubbed away, but they can be turned into reminders, soft etchings of survival. At the community center, Myra won her case. Her nephew agreed to sign everything back in exchange for avoiding court. She cried when I handed her the new papers legally stamped and sealed. You saved my life, she whispered. I shook my head. You saved your life, I said. I just helped you draw the map. Word spread fast after that. I started getting calls from neighboring townspeople asking if I could help their mothers, their grandmothers, their friends, seniors who had been silenced too long. Some had stories worse than mine. Others were just beginning to suspect something was wrong. Each time I opened a folder, clicked my pen, and said, "Let's begin." Then came a new invitation. June called me on a Thursday. You have a reputation now, she said, laughing. There's a nonprofit looking for someone to speak on senior housing rights. I gave them your name. I blinked. Me. Speak? You know this better than most lawyers. But I'm not. You are, she interrupted gently. You're exactly the voice they need. I didn't say yes immediately. That night, I stood in front of the mirror holding a pen like it was a microphone and practiced saying, "My name is Eloise Carver, and I almost lost everything because I trusted the wrong people." It sounded raw, real. It sounded like truth. The following week, I stood on a stage in a small community hall, a microphone in my hand, my voice steady. Dozens of people sat before me, many of them with gray hair and careful eyes. And I told them everything, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I spoke of trust misplaced, of coercion disguised as kindness, of the day I signed away my house and the day I took it back. And I watched as heads nodded, as tears gathered in corners of old eyes. They weren't just listening, they were remembering. After the event, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her late 60s with a cane and a fierce gaze. "I haven't told anyone yet," she said, voice low. "But my daughter asked me to sign something I didn't understand last week. I think it was about the condo." I handed her my card. "Call me," I said. "We'll look at it together." She clutched the card like it was a lifeline. And maybe in some way it was. Because the lifelines we need most aren't always ropes or rescue boats. Sometimes they're voices, quiet ones, that remind us we're not alone. I began keeping a ledger. Not a financial one, though. Old habits made me format it just like an expense report. No, this ledger was something else entirely. I titled it, Names That Deserve to Be Heard. It was my way of recording the stories of the people who came to me, each name a quiet rebellion, each entry a refusal to let manipulation and shame bury their voices. The first page, Myra Kingsley. Second, Geraldine from Oak Terrace. Third, Luis Varela, a retired mechanic whose son tricked him into refinancing his paid-off house. Fourth, Edith Walsh, who cried in my kitchen when she realized her signature had been forged by her own niece. I didn't tell them I was keeping their stories. Not in full. I wasn't writing a book. I wasn't trying to be famous. But I wanted a record. Proof that survival comes in waves. That dignity once buried can rise again. One rainy afternoon, I received a knock at the door. It was Aaron. He was drenched. Hair-flat shirt sticking to his back. No umbrella. I opened the door surprised and without thinking stepped aside to let him in. He held out a canvas bag. "Groceries," he said simply. "Thought you might need a few things." He looked different. Older, yes, but softer too. His usual stiff posture had given way to something more grounded, less performative. I took the bag and placed it on the counter. "I can put on tea," I said. He nodded, removing his shoes. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. Just the clink of porcelain, the gurgle of the kettle, the old familiar scent of jasmine filling the air. When we finally sat down, he took a deep breath. "I've filed for separation." I looked up, surprised. He didn't look proud or broken, just resolved. "I know that's not what you wanted to hear. I know it's not what Dad would have wanted either. But I can't keep pretending Lydia's way of living is okay with me. And it's not just about what happened to you. It's about everything I let happen to myself, too." I stirred my tea. He continued, "I used to think loyalty meant silence. Now I realize loyalty without truth is just complicity." I nodded. "That's something I had to learn, too." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo. I hadn't seen it in years. It was of Aaron, age 10, standing beside my husband in front of the porch swing. Both of them laughing faces lit by summer sun. "I found it when I moved out," he said. "I thought you should have it." I took it with both hands. It wasn't just a picture. It was a bridge. Over the next few weeks, Aaron came by more often. He helped repair a broken window latch, brought mulch for the garden. Once he even joined me at the community center to help seniors scan and digitize their documents. The staff didn't know he was my son. I didn't introduce him that way. Not yet. Let him earn it back. Let him become someone new on his own terms. Lydia, as far as I knew, had moved in with her sister across town. She sent no more letters, made no more contact. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if she felt regret or simply defeat. But I didn't dwell there. I had rooms to repaint, letters to write, people to help, and a swing that needed fresh varnish before the weather turned. One morning, as I was flipping through my ledger, I paused on a blank page and wrote something different. Not a name, not a case, but a truth. I was never too old to begin again. I was never too quiet to be heard. They tried to erase me with a pen, so I rewrote myself in ink. I closed the book and smiled, because this wasn't just my home again. It was my voice. It always had been. They just didn't hear it the first time. But now the whole world was starting to listen. The first time I spoke on a live radio program, my hands trembled. The station was local, tucked inside a red brick building with ivy creeping up the windows. A young producer guided me into the booth, placed headphones over my ears, and offered me water with the kind of politeness reserved for old women and first-time guests. "I know this is new," she said with a kind smile, "but you'll be great." I wasn't nervous because of the mic or the lights. I was nervous because for so many years my story had been treated as inconvenient, disbelief disguised as politeness, dismissal hidden behind nods. But this time I had an audience that wanted to hear the truth, and I was ready to speak it. The host was a woman named Camilla Sharp, warm and deeply empathetic. She introduced me as Eloise Carver, advocate for elder legal justice survivor of housing coercion and volunteer advisor for at-risk seniors. That last part caught me. Survivor. Yes, that's what I was. We spoke for 30 minutes. I told my story simply, not with drama or theatrics, but with measured precision like a legal brief written from memory and emotion combined. Camilla asked questions that cut deep. How did it feel to be manipulated by people you raised? Were you ever tempted to just walk away? What advice would you give to someone listening who feels that something is wrong but can't name it? I answered honestly. It felt like being erased while still alive. Yes, I wanted to walk away, but I also realized that if I didn't fight, I was teaching them, and everyone watching that, they could win by being cruel, quietly. And start by trusting your instincts. If something feels off, it usually is. And if you need help, ask. There are people like me now. People who know. When the segment ended, Camilla turned off her mic and leaned over. "Eloise, you just changed someone's life." I blinked back the tears. "I hope I helped them avoid what I went through," I whispered. She nodded. "You helped them find a language for it." That afternoon, I received dozens of emails from listeners. Most were short, simple, powerful. "You just described what happened to my mom. Thank you." I thought I was the only one. I've been afraid to speak up. I'm not anymore. There was one email that made me pause. It was from a man named Reggie in Montana. I took my dad's house thinking he wouldn't care. Now I realize he never said anything because he trusted me. I broke that. I'm sending him this interview today. I just want to start over. I sat with that message for a long time. Not because it absolved what people like Lydia had done, but because it reminded me that not all stories end with bitterness. Some stories end with better beginnings. At the community center, we printed out flyers titled, "Don't Sign Until You Understand." Below it, my face, small but visible, and a list of red flags. Sudden urgency to sign documents. Promises without paperwork. Changes made during illness. You don't need to read all of that. We stapled the flyers to bulletin boards across 3 neighborhoods. By the end of the week, 5 new seniors showed up asking for help. One woman, Agnes, carried a box of documents in a shopping cart. "I don't know what's in here," she said, "but I'm scared of it." We sat down together. We read. We translated. And we freed her from a reverse mortgage she never understood she had agreed to. She hugged me after and said, "You made me feel human again." That evening, Aaron joined me for dinner. He brought pasta and wine, and we sat on the porch under a sky filled with soft pinks and purples. After we ate, he reached into his pocket. "I've been writing too," he said. "I don't know if it's any good, but it's helped." He handed me a small notebook. Inside were letters, all addressed to me, some filled with regret, others filled with memory. One read, "I remember when you carried me to bed after I fell asleep in front of the TV. I was too old for that, probably. But you did it anyway. Because you loved me. I want to carry you now, not out of pity, out of love." I closed the book carefully. "Do you want it back?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. I want you to keep it, or burn it, or frame it, whatever feels right." I stood up, walked inside, and placed it on my bookshelf beside my ledger. Between memory and truth, between what was lost and what was rebuilt. The first time I stood behind a podium at a town hall meeting, it wasn't about me. It was about zoning ordinances and elder fraud prevention, part of a new initiative the city had started after 3 cases, including mine, had drawn quiet attention from local officials. They wanted someone who'd been there. So there I stood in a room of folding chairs and fluorescent lights, reading from notes I'd scribbled in a yellow legal pad. Behind me sat city council members and community attorneys. In front of me, rows of quiet faces, older women with bags on their laps, men with canes and hearing aids, adult children who had brought them arms, crossed eyes, skeptical. "I'm not a lawyer," I began. "I'm not an elected official. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because someone once smiled while stealing from me and I didn't see it coming." Silence. And then eyes started to lift, necks straightened. Because the real stories? They don't come from perfect people. They come from survivors. I spoke for 15 minutes. About coercion that wears a friendly face. About the danger of misplaced trust. About the long road back to dignity after betrayal. Then I finished with this. You don't need to shout to protect yourself. But you do need to act. And if you think being quiet makes you weak, let me remind you. It was silence that got me into this. But it was also silence used wisely that got me out. They clapped softly, not the kind of applause that fills a theater. The kind that fills a heart. After the meeting, an elderly man approached me. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. "My daughter says I should sell and move in with her. She says it's the only way I won't end up alone." I looked at him. "Do you want to move?" He paused. "No." "Then don't," I said. "Love doesn't come with conditions. And your home isn't a debt to be collected." He nodded, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. That night, I sat on my back porch and stared at the stars. It was a clear sky. The kind my husband used to call honest weather, nothing to hide. And for the first time, I believed that maybe something good had come from the worst thing that ever happened to me. I had turned my silence into speech, my pain into a map, my story into shelter for others. A few days later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, no name. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with 5 words. "You rewrote what silence means." I held it in my hands and felt something rise in my chest. Not pride, not victory, but something steadier. Legacy, not the kind passed through deeds or bank accounts, but the kind that lives in hearts that were once broken, then healed. At the community center, we started a new program. We called it Paper and Power. Each month, seniors brought in their personal documents, deeds, wills, loan statements, and we walked through them together. No legalese, no pressure. Just a flashlight on the fine print. I partnered with local lawyers, banks, and even a few real estate agents who wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. Word spread quickly. Within 3 months, we'd helped over 60 seniors renegotiate or reverse harmful agreements. One woman, Beverly, had been on the verge of losing her mobile home after her son borrowed against it without her consent. We caught the discrepancy, helped her file. She got it back. She baked a pie the next day and brought it to my door. "I haven't slept in months," she said. "Now I nap on purpose." Even Aaron volunteered one weekend. He brought bagels and helped carry boxes. At one point, he sat with an elderly man named Mr. Tanaka, helping him translate bank documents from Japanese to English. Afterwards, he turned to me and said, "I think this is the first time I've actually been useful in years." I smiled. You're learning to listen. That's enough. Later that evening, we sat on the front steps sipping hot cider. Aaron looked out across the lawn. Do you think she'll ever come back? He meant Lydia. I considered it. She might, I said. But this house doesn't belong to ghosts anymore. He nodded slowly like he was finally beginning to believe it. Inside, the lights glowed warm. My ledger sat open, a new name penciled in. Not because of pain, but because of protection. Because every time I help someone stand, I remember what it felt like to fall and what it took to rise. Not rage, not revenge, but something quieter, something stronger, something permanent. Winter arrived like an old friend, uninvited but expected. The wind pressed against the windows. The porch swing swayed gently with no one in it, and I found myself reaching for heavier sweaters and deeper thoughts. But inside the house, the warmth held. A fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of cinnamon drifted from the oven where I had baked my late husband's favorite apple crisp. His birthday was always the first week of December, and though he'd been gone for years, I still celebrated it quietly. Not with candles or tears, just with memory. Aaron stopped by that evening. He brought a box of decorations from his new apartment. On top sat a wooden ornament shaped like a small house, etched with the words, "We come home by healing." I turned it in my hands for a long moment before placing it on the mantel. He stood there beside me, watching the fire. "I wish Dad could see this," he said. "He can," I replied. "He just doesn't say much." Aaron chuckled softly. "He'd be proud of you." I didn't answer, because some truths don't need agreement. They just need to be felt. The next morning, I sat down with a notepad and began drafting a letter, not for the court, not for a speech, but for myself. I titled it, "Things I Know Now," and I began to write, "A kind face can lie. Silence can be either power or prison, depending on when you break it. A signature should never be rushed. A home is not just land and walls. It's memory. It's identity. Even betrayal doesn't kill love completely, but it does demand boundaries." I stopped after 5, not because I ran out of lessons, but because those were the ones that etched themselves deepest into my skin. At the center, the number of visitors doubled after our segment aired on regional TV. More than 100 seniors came in with folders, questions, and trembling hope. One of them, Ruth, age 84, sat across from me with tears already in her eyes. "My daughter had me sign something after my stroke. I didn't ask questions. I thought it was just insurance forms. But now she's renting out my house while I live in her guest room." Her voice broke on the word guest. I asked to see the papers. She handed them to me with both hands like they were toxic. As I read through them, my stomach twisted. It was too familiar, predatory, precision-engineered guilt. "She called me ungrateful when I asked about it," Ruth whispered. "Told me I was lucky to still have a roof." I reached for her hand. "You're not ungrateful," I said. "You're unheard." We filed an emergency petition that week. 3 weeks later, Ruth moved back into her house with locks, changed, mail restored, and a new pink doormat she proudly picked out herself. It read, "I decide who crosses this threshold." I laughed when I saw it. "Subtle," I said. "Not anymore." She winked. One afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox with no name. Inside was a short note. "You helped my grandmother. You don't know me, but I'll never forget what you did. Thank you for giving her back her voice." There was a drawing included, crayon, messy, beautiful. A woman on a porch swing, smiling. Underneath, in crooked lettering, "This is you." I taped it to my refrigerator. Because even after courtrooms, interviews, and policies revised by my testimony, nothing felt as powerful as that child's drawing. It was proof that stories ripple, that restoration radiates, that one woman's fight, once invisible, could become a lighthouse for others drifting quietly in the dark. That evening, I lit a single candle in the windowsill, not for ceremony, for remembrance, and for hope. The world had not changed overnight. There were still people like Lydia, still documents being signed in silence, still elders too afraid to speak. But the difference now, some of us were watching, and we weren't just watching anymore. We were answering. The new year arrived with frost on the glass and clarity in the heart. I awoke on January 1st to the quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that had once reminded me of passing time, but now felt like a steady heartbeat, proof that even after betrayal, time keeps moving forward. But this year felt different. This time, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning again on my own terms. My first act of the new year was unceremonious. I cleaned the attic. Boxes of old clothes, dusty books, forgotten holiday lights. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to make room. But among the clutter, I found something unexpected. An old voice recorder. I recognized it immediately. It was the one my husband used when preparing lectures for the community college. He'd record his ideas, then transcribe them onto yellow pads, which I would later find stacked on the kitchen table like towers of thought. Out of curiosity, I dusted it off and pressed play. A grainy voice crackled through the speaker. Note to self. Remind Eloise to take more photos of the garden this spring. She always says it looks its best in May. I froze. His voice. Soft. Warm. So familiar it hurt. And remind her she doesn't need to take care of everything. It's okay to ask for help. She carries more than anyone sees. I sat down on the attic floor, the recorder cradled in my hands, tears slipping down my cheeks. Even years after his passing, he was still looking out for me, still reminding me who I was, and who I didn't have to be. Later that day, I walked into town. I passed the community center, the bakery, the park bench, where I once sat with Lydia on her second visit to my home before I knew who she'd become. Everything looked the same, but I didn't. At the corner cafe, I met June for tea. She wore her signature red scarf and her lawyer's no-nonsense posture. "You've got a following now," she said, sipping her chamomile. "Don't be ridiculous," I laughed. "I'm serious. The local bar association wants you to help draft a series of senior protection guidelines. Statewide." I blinked. "Me? I'm not a policymaker." "No," she said. "But you're a survivor, and people listen to survivors." I nodded slowly, then smiled. "Tell them I'll do it." In the weeks that followed, I began working with June and a panel of lawyers to create what we would later call the Eloise Protocol, a framework for verifying elder signatures involving independent counsel and placing mandatory waiting periods on asset transfers from aging individuals to family members. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a ripple, not a wave. And sometimes ripples move mountains. Aaron helped where he could. He was never pushy. He never overstepped. He just showed up. He fixed a gutter after a windstorm. He drove Mr. Tanaka to his physical therapy sessions when the community shuttle was full. He brought by soup on a Thursday evening and didn't even stay to be thanked. One afternoon, he handed me a plain envelope and said, "No pressure. Just read it when you're ready." I opened it later that night. Inside was a letter. Just a few lines. "I'm not asking to be written back into the will. I'm asking to be written back into your life. Whatever that looks like, I'll accept it." I stared at the page for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it beside the notebook of letters he'd given me months ago. The heart doesn't forget betrayal easily, but sometimes it remembers love louder. By spring, I had turned the guest room into a study, not because I was expecting guests, because I needed a place where I could write in peace. I filled the shelves with books, framed old photos, and placed a new journal at the center of the desk. Its first entry read, "I gave away something precious." Then I took it back. Not with rage, not with war, but with law, with truth, and with the quiet determination of a woman who knows her worth. I paused, then wrote, "And I am not done yet," because the story didn't end with a courtroom or a reversal. It began with a woman who had every reason to give up, and didn't. Spring arrived with unapologetic color. The garden, once bare and battered, bloomed again. Daffodils burst from the soil beside the porch swing. The climbing roses I had almost given up on came back defiantly, their petals soft, but their roots fierce. Every morning, I made my tea and walked the path behind the house, barefoot, grounding myself. Not in nostalgia, in ownership. This was mine again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I fought for it. The study had become my sanctuary. Letters from across the country now arrived weekly, handwritten, typed, sometimes crayon-scrawled, from people who heard my story or sat in my workshops. Some were victims of legal manipulation. Others were survivors like me. All of them had the same message. Thank you for reminding me that quiet doesn't mean weak. There was a letter from a woman in Wisconsin. After my son had me sign over my property, I thought that was it. Then I heard your story. I found a lawyer. I got my land back. I got myself back. And another from a man in Florida. I watched your town hall speech with my mother. We didn't know how to talk about what had happened. But now we do. You gave us the words. Every letter, every voice, every story, they became part of my own healing. The weight of what I had endured lightened with each voice added to the chorus. One April afternoon, I stood at the edge of my property and watched a new couple move into the house across the street. They were young, excited, just starting out. The woman waved at me. "Hi, we're the Mitchells. This is our first home," I smiled. "Welcome. Take good care of it. Homes have memories." She laughed, not quite sure what I meant. But one day she would. That evening, Aaron came by with a tin of cookies and a surprise. He had created a small website, the Eloise Ledger, a place for stories, anonymous submissions, resources, guides, a helpline routed through the legal center. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I used your name." I stared at the screen. At the clean layout, the simple message on the homepage. "You're not a burden. You're not alone. And it's not too late." I looked at him. "I don't mind," I said quietly. "I'm proud." And for the first time in a long while, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Joy. That night, I returned to my study. I opened my journal and added one final entry. They thought they could take what I built with a signature. They underestimated the strength of the woman who held the pen. I closed the book, not because the story was finished, but because this chapter was, and tomorrow I would start something new. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Outside wind stirred the branches like breath, and I sat in the heart of the home they tried to erase. Whole, heard, home. What happened to me wasn't uncommon. That's the part that stays with me the most. Not the betrayal, not the courtroom, not even the reclaimed deed, but the unsettling truth that it could happen to anyone. To your neighbor, to your mother, to the person sitting quietly at the next table in a coffee shop. And most of them won't speak up, because shame is loud in its silence. But I chose differently, not because I'm special, not because I had money or power, but because I remembered who I was before the manipulation, before the documents, before they tried to shrink me into nothing. I was Eloise Carver. I am Eloise Carver, a woman who spent her life serving the court and who finally called on it to serve her. I never screamed. I never slammed a door. I simply stood up. That's what quiet revenge looks like. Not cruelty, not chaos, but correction. Now my story lives not just in these walls, but in the lives I've touched. In every signature double-checked. In every elder who says, "Wait, I'd like a second opinion." In every person who remembers that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're wisdom earned by pain. So if you're watching this and wondering whether you're strong enough to speak up, let me make it simple. You already are. And if you need a hand, I'll be here. With a pen and a porch swing and a voice no one will ever erase again.